thank you very much for all of you coming out in foul evening like this evening. When we got here, I was thinking, yeah, maybe half a dozen people going to brave the rain. But no, you all came out, which is great to see. Really good to see. Yeah, I think, okay, maybe unlike some of the sort of people here, I did actually I did celebrate the Labour victory. It was really good to see the Tories get a stuffing after 14 years. Do I trust Starmer's Labour Party, or as I like to call it, I can't believe it's not Tory? Of course I can. But you cannot deny that we've suffered under 14 years of Tory cuts, 14 years of Tory racism, 14 years of Tory hostile environment, refugee onslaught, etc., etc. To see the back of those bastards, to me, is a really good thing. Yeah. So while I was watching the exit polls at 10 o'clock, because they have all this build up, and then actually they've got no news for hours. They just do they do the exit poll, and then have that silly thing where people are running around in Sunderland trying to unstuff ballot boxes. Very silly. But nonetheless, looking at the numbers, and you saw Labour majority of 410. Wow, that's fantastic. Really really positive. Then you looked at something that wasn't quite so positive, was they were predicting at the time, luckily it didn't transpire, but they were predicting at the time that Reform were going to get 13 MPs. And I think that's an example of how much, of course they're just doing exit polls, it's all statistics, it's also bit of political mumbo jumbo. But nonetheless, I think it shows the kind of power of the reform vote, the fact that they were predicting 13. Fact is, thank goodness, it only came out as 5. That's 5 too many as far as I'm concerned, And they still got 14% of the vote. If we had proportional representation, they'd have 14% of the vote. And what's interesting is if you look at the constituencies where they won, everyone was talking about Labour's Red Wall that was taken over by the Tories, but actually that Sunderland vote, despite all the silliness running around, actually that was the first vote gave an indication of where Reform were actually making inroads. It wasn't just into Tory heartlands, it was in some of what used to be called Labour's Red Wall. Sunderland, can you imagine Sunderland voting for a far right party like Reform? You can't really imagine it. And yet that's what happened. They came second. In actual fact, 136 constituencies, Reform beat the Tories into third place. 136 constituencies. Now, people have already said this, but anyone's got any doubt about what Reform stand for or who Reform are, you just have to watch that Channel 4's expose where they went round with the people around Clacton. They're complaining about, police cars with pride flags on them, what the hell's going on? And, black this and black that. And it's absolutely disgusting. It was a real revelation of what of what Reform actually stand for. And we need to make sure that we despite their electoral success, that we carry on fighting them. But let's not pretend that the Tories have gone away. Because, think about it, the Tories now, this is the classic excuse that a lot of the hard right and the Tory government have been looking for, or ex-Tory government have been looking for. Because now the right wing, Suella Braverman, Priti Patel, Jacob Rees-Mogg, all those people can stand up there. Jacob Rees-Mogg's answer to the election was, we weren't Tory enough. In other words, they weren't right wing enough. And they're really going to drag the Tory party to the right, and we need to be aware of that. Whilst we're fighting Reform, we need to make sure we don't take our eyes off the Tories, because 47%, a poll recently said 47% of Tory voters would approve of Reform joining the Tory party. Can you think of a worse outcome? Reform and Tory standing side by side. It's horrible. It's horrible. As other people have said, it's not just in the UK that we're seeing rise of the far right. That we're seeing fascists actually starting to stand. People have talked about France, and I think to a certain extent, I think in France they got it wrong. They left it too late. By the time they really realised what the Assembly Nationale were really about, it was almost too late. It was a huge electoral swing towards them, and they had to fight really hard to cobble together a pretty shambolic coalition to make sure they didn't get to power. We can't afford to make that mistake over here. You look at other places in Europe. A friend of mine lives in Sweden. You've got the Sweden Democrats, Giorgia Meloni, Brothers of Italy. What a name that is, right? It tells you all you need to know. Up and down to Europe, the failure of neoliberal capitalism has led the working class to go towards more extreme things. The idea that immigrants are somehow to blame for their poverty, that somehow the problems in the NHS are the problems because of immigration. That kind of message has been spread all across Europe, and we really need to make sure that we don't allow that to thrive over here. Okay. So, what was I going to say? I've lost my track now. So I'm too excited. But yeah, so it's across the sort of like across the whole of Europe that we've seen that lurch to the right, and we really need to make sure. I think one of the things that is noticeable about the UK is that really actually compared to the other sort of like countries that I mentioned, Spain, Poland, Bulgaria, all those other countries, actually reform is the first time we've started to see a real sort of like organised right-wing sort of like force. It's not the same as sort of like some of the other countries, and I think there's a reason for that. And I think the reason for that is because of the anti-racist camp tradition that we've had in this country. Whether you go back to the anti-Nazi League, which is where I cut my political teeth all those sort of years ago, Rock Against Racism, Love Music, Hate Racism, Stand Up to Racism, all those different groups have made sure that the racists have largely been kept in their box. We've beaten sort of like BNP, we've beaten the EDL, we beat the NF way back when. And if we continue to sort of like organise and campaign against sort of like racism, we can keep reform and sort of like the worst fascist of all in the UK, Tommy Robinson, we can keep him back in his box. All of you should probably have a leaflet about Tommy Robinson, because amazingly, actually, for the far right, generally speaking, when the far right used to come down to Brighton, which was one of their favourite places to come and sort of like demonstrate, a couple of hundred of them, if at most, that was considered to be a big sort of like demo. Tommy Robinson managed to organise around 5,000 people in London. 5,000 sort of like hardcore sort of like fascists. That's really something that we need to be sort of like very aware of and very sort of like concerned about. So if you can get up to London on the 27th, weekend at 27th, to protest against Tommy Robinson, I urge you very much to do so. So the last thing I want to sort of like say is I think there's nobody in this room, I'm sure, who consider themselves to be a racist, but it's not enough just to be not a racist. You need to be an active anti-racist. What that means is in your workplaces, in your schools, in your trade unions, on the streets, wherever you come across sort of like racism, you need to stamp on it. You need to explain that it's not sort of like right, that it's wrong, that we are not going to put up with that racist sort of like division. We're going to sort of like fight for a better society where everyone's sort of like everyone equal. And so we managed to do it with the NF, we managed to do it with the BNP, we managed to do it with the EDL. We can also do it with Tommy Robinson, and we can also do it with Nigel Farage. Chuck them in the dustbin of history where they belong.